This is Wall Street Week. I'm David Weston, bringing you stories of capitalism. This week, explosive growth in the world of racing. We talk to the drivers, engineers, and power players in the business of Formula One. But we start with a story about saving for the future, when it makes sense for an entire country to put something away for a rainy day, and when doing something so sensible could lead to a whole new set of problems.
We'll create America's own sovereign wealth fund to invest in great national endeavors for the benefit of all of the American people. Why don't we have a wealth fund? Other countries have wealth funds. We have nothing.
In the final weeks leading up to the election, Donald Trump and Joe Biden found some common ground on at least one thing: the wisdom of creating some form of sovereign wealth fund for the United States. But that they've worked for some countries doesn't necessarily mean they'd worked for the world's largest economy.
So it's really interesting that in this really polarized environment that we're living, both Trump and Biden are thinking about possibly starting a national sovereign wealth fund in the United States.
The idea that we should somehow be systematically setting up some government authority to make broad investments in the economy of our country or the economy of other countries seems kind of crazy to me.
Over 80 countries around the world have sovereign wealth funds, state-owned funds that invest the country's cash reserves for the long-term good of its citizens and the economy. Globally, assets under management in all SWFs totaled $12.8 trillion, up more than tenfold over the last 2 decades.
We have invested in 9,000 companies around the world. We own 1.5% of all the equities in the world. In Europe, we own close to 3%. And then we own bonds and we own real estate.
That's Nicolai Tangen, the man in charge of Norway's sovereign wealth fund valued at roughly, get this, $1.7 trillion.
It's a big fund in a small country, right? And you have a lot of stakeholders, people who want to have a say in pretty much everything, right? And so you have to navigate this. I would say the ministry has been tremendously important in the success of the fund. I think we have great politicians in the country, but we need to navigate all these stakeholders, and that's a very, very interesting exercise.
At the end of 2023, Tangen's Government Pension Fund Global topped the list of such funds, followed by China's CIC and SAFE Investment Company, with 2 from the Middle East, Abu Dhabi's and Kuwait's, rounding out the world's top 5. It's no coincidence that so many of the countries with large sovereign wealth funds, like Norway, are rich in oil and other natural resources.
The usual context is when you have a country that is in surplus at the government and at the national level because of very large exports. Then you have all this huge fund, and often you can't invest it all at home, and so you want to go and invest it abroad.
Initially, the strategy was to invest mostly in equity, in real estate, so to invest definitely outside their natural resources, although they also invest in oil companies outside their countries.
Ruth Aguilera is a professor at Northeastern University who has studied the origins of sovereign wealth funds and how their mandates and strategies have evolved through the years.
Now they have become very sophisticated. They are investing in AI, data centers, and also a huge push towards green infrastructures and renewables. So that's another kind of like big asset class that they're investing in. So it has totally switched from investing more in, they definitely invest in all the publicly traded companies, but now the focus has switched towards what many investors are doing, AI and sustainable investment.
As the largest sovereign wealth fund, Tangen's NBIM in some ways sets the pace for others.
So Norway is the poster child of sovereign wealth funds, mostly because it's super transparent in their goals. So not only they have a council of ethics, which has existed for a long time, but in 2012 they decided that they would only invest in companies that they have good corporate governance.
You are the CEO of the largest sovereign wealth fund in the world. Where did it come from? Where did NBIM come from?
Well, it's very interesting. So in Norway, they found the oil in '69, and it was the last attempt. They were drilling the last well, and if they hadn't found oil then, they would just have needed to pack up the toys and go home. You know, it was announced to the Norwegian people the day before Christmas Eve in '69. And in many countries, it had been a curse. You know, it had crowded out industries, it had led to corruption and so on. And so the politicians in Norway decided to set up this fund. And it was set up in '96, started with 2 billion Norwegian kroner, and is now grown to 19,000 billion Norwegian kroner, or $1.7 trillion.
Along with its scope, its mission has also grown over its 26 years. I wonder if there's another function of a sovereign wealth fund. In fact, it's described in some of your materials online, which is sort of a almost wealth transfer from the current generation to the future generation. Is there a function for that even if you don't have a surplus?
Perhaps there are some philosophical reasons for doing that, but I do think you would need to have, it's basically to save and safeguard the wealth for the future. But I wouldn't borrow today in order to spend in the future. But if you have one of these windfall gains like we've had on the continental shelf, I think it makes a lot of sense.
You have a mandate, obviously, to maximize return, but also with an element of sustainability on various indicators: economic stability, climate, environment stability. Do those things come into tension with one another?
No, I don't think they do, because we believe that climate risk is a financial risk. And the reason for that is that you know, if you have, we own 1.5% of all the equities in the world, and if we have one company polluting, well, it's being picked up by all the other companies we have. We need to care about, you know, the future. We need to care about the climate. We see that a deteriorating climate is causing worse harvests, it's driving up prices. We see it now in coffee, olive oil, orange juice, and so on. And so it's basically a financial risk, and it hasn't been the case before, but it's increasingly the case.
Do you even take a look at some investments that might have an adverse effect on climate? For example, brown coal. As I understand, you don't invest in any company involved in brown coal.
No, that's correct. And that's a separate entity from us. It's called the Council of Ethics, and they exclude things for ethical reasons. So there are a lot of different types of weapons we don't do. We don't do coal, we don't do tobacco, for instance.
How do you take into account changes in governments? In Norway, for example, to what extent does your investment strategy vary with who's in power?
We have a very constant investment philosophy. And I think that's really one of the success factors behind the fund, is that our investment mandate is widely anchored. So all the political parties agree on kind of the big guidelines, the main guidelines for the fund. It means that when we have a change of government, our investment philosophy does not change. It remains constant.
Given your emphasis on the environment, do you see a retrenchment in a lot of companies in their commitment?
Yes, there is retrenchment. There is a backlash against ESG and against climate. So it's moving slower than we would have hoped for and than we would have wished for. But you know, I do think if you are really serious about your business, you are serious about your stakeholders, about your employees, you need to take these things seriously.
Essential to that philosophy is NBIM's focus on transparency in its holdings, weightings, and its market value.
If you go there, anybody goes there, they have a very, you know, a building that's like all glass to represent their transparency. They are very open to, we have talked to them many times, and everything is publicly available. So that's, I think, very constructive. And I think they are an example for the rest of the funds on how to follow the Santiago principles, how to invest responsibly, because that will lead in the long term to better financial returns.
The Santiago principles are a set of 24 voluntary guidelines for sovereign wealth funds, created in 2008 by the IMF and a group of the largest funds in order to address concerns about risk-taking and governance. How do you compare with other sovereign wealth funds? I mean, there's one in Singapore, obviously there's one in UAE. How are you similar, how are you different?
Yeah, there are a lot of really fine sovereign wealth funds out there. I would say how we, the main differences, well, one, we are 100% transparent, right? We even have a live tracker on our website showing the real value of the fund, and you know how often it's updated? What do you think? Well, 13 times a second. So that's really live value of the fund. And it's actually the most looked at number in the country, which is quite interesting. Then we are very long term. We are not in the private market. And then we also have, I think the fact that it is so broadly politically anchored is a bit different.
The fund's website tells us just how broadly anchored it is. 72% is in equities of those 9,000 companies, 26% in fixed income, and the rest is in real estate and renewable energy infrastructure. How do you look for alpha? When you go out there and look to beat returns, what sorts of indicia do you look at?
Well, we try to find great companies which outperform their peer group. Quality companies which can compound at higher rates, high return on capital with some moat, which means that these returns can be sustainable. So that's what we try to do.
How much of it is ground up, that is company by company, as opposed to certain sectors or certain styles?
The alpha we try to create is all company specific. We have delegated mandates. We have roughly 100 portfolio managers who have a specific portfolio, and they try to outperform the market on a daily basis. Now, we try to have a longer term time horizon in what we do. So typically we would measure results over a rolling 3-year period. And I think that's important in this market to be increasingly long term in your thinking.
You are, last time I checked, 70% in equities.
Yeah.
Does that vary, and who decides to vary it?
Well, it's the ministry who decides. Now it has been pretty constant for a long period of time. We increased the equity portion from 40 to 60% during the financial crisis. So actually during 2008, 2009, we were probably the biggest buyer of equities in the whole world. Now, in retrospect, that turned out to be a good thing.
Unlike some of its peers, none of the fund is invested in private equity. You didn't mention private equity or private credit. Why do you not invest in those?
Well, that's not in our mandate. So we only invest in listed equities. We have suggested that to the Parliament, that we should be allowed to go into private investments, but so far we cannot do it. There is a political process, and then we'll see where that will lead, because we do think we should have all the tools in the toolbox, but for the moment we haven't.
Even without all the tools in the toolbox, few would argue that Norway's sovereign wealth fund has been anything but a success for the country. But Professor Aguilera says that's not always the case around the world.
Other funds have not worked so well. One of them is the 1MDB from Malaysia. The other one is the one from Libya, and I would attribute to that mostly to poor corporate governance. They have the politicians in there, the fund is captured by the politicians, they don't have transparency.
Sovereign wealth funds may work well for some countries and not others, but are they right for the United States? That's where we turn next on Wall Street Week. Sovereign wealth funds date back to the 1800s, and although the U.S. doesn't have its own investment fund, 20 states do, including Texas, New Mexico, and Alaska.
The United States has over $330 billion in sovereign wealth funds, but the largest one is the one in Alaska. And it's a fund that works very, very well because they have a very clear mandate on where they invest the revenues, the profits of this fund, which is mostly in education. And they also have very good corporate governance following the Santiago principles. So I think that's the clue to their success, other than, having this nice pocket of money that rather than they investing it directly into more risky things, they have decided to invest in long-term, diversifying from the oil and the gas. So I would say that it's a very successful model. Maybe the US could also learn something from it.
We wanted to see what we could learn from it, so we went to Alaska to find out for ourselves.
This is a very popular topic in Alaska. Every year it's like, how much is the dividend going to be this year? When are we getting it? Are we getting direct deposit?
It's uniquely Alaskan, to be honest with you. It's a way for Alaskans to store their non-renewable resources, especially oil, mining.
Mike Dunleavy moved to Alaska more than 40 years ago and got his first job working in a logging camp. Today, he's the state's 12th governor.
The permanent fund was born in '76. 1980, the permanent fund dividend came into being. This is all as a result of oil that was discovered in Alaska, David, and some really, really smart people that had a lot of foresight. The fear was that we would spend all of our oil money and we wouldn't have anything for future generations.
It is amazing. I was actually here the first year we got a check. It was a $400 check, and as a teenager, I was so excited. We bought a VCR that tells you how old it was.
When it was created a half century ago, the fund began with an investment of $734,000. Since then, its assets have grown to over $80 billion as of September.
It's the second largest fund in the United States in the world per capita after the Norwegian fund. It's well managed, it's protected. It's an integral part of Alaska. It is something that you can ask any person in Alaska, whether you're in Barrow, Southeast Alaska, Anchorage, if they know what the permanent fund is, and most people tell you they know exactly what the permanent fund is and the PFD, the permanent fund dividend. So it is in the lexicon of almost every Alaskan.
I mean, any type of Alaskan, no matter what age you are. In my situation, my dad saved up our Alaska Permanent Fund for pretty much all our lives so that we could use it for college, specifically, because tuition is always rising. So he just figured that he could use that as a means to save for college and stuff, and that's worked out really well for me. Even still, I continue to save it in case I have extra tuition I have to pay for and stuff like that, and it's been really helpful. Yeah, it's definitely probably one of the main reasons I was even able to go to college.
The origins of Alaska's fund and its purpose are similar to Norway's.
Countries like Norway have sovereign wealth funds because they have these huge oil revenues coming in and they need to be recycled. That's why Alaska accumulated a sovereign wealth fund. The situation in the United States is almost completely different. We are running large budget deficits. We are running large trade deficits. So if we have revenue, the first thing to do with it is to stop accumulating debt as rapidly as we are. Any kind of sovereign wealth fund would be, in effect, borrowing on the federal treasury in order to go make a lot of private investments.
Norway had a substantial surplus. If it hadn't had the surplus, would there have been a sovereign wealth fund?
I don't think so. I think you need money to set it up. I don't think it makes sense to borrow money to set it up, because then you need to, in a way, guarantee that you have a so-called spread above the borrow cost. You borrow money in the bank in order to invest in the market, and you can't always guarantee that you'd get better returns from investing in the market than the borrow cost. So I think that's a risky strategy.
If that is a good idea, the place to start would be by taking the federal pension funds, by taking the Social Security Trust Fund, by taking the other trust funds that the government already has and investing in something that was higher return than Treasury bonds. I think there are a variety of reasons for worrying about that. When you start having government investing in companies, it starts intruding in those companies. But it'd be much more natural to start with the Treasury bonds that the government's already investing in than to set up some new kind of sovereign wealth fund. Why do we want to be borrowing U.S. money and investing it abroad? Why don't we think that the private capital markets will find the best uses for funds in the United States? Again, there is a rationale for this in large surplus countries that have a recycling problem. We're not one of those countries, and those are the principal countries that have sovereign wealth funds. There may be a rationale for government borrowing and investing in specific sectors, but the idea that the policy of the United States at this moment should be to further leverage the economy at a time when corporate balance sheets are already levered, at a time when the government is more levered than it ever has been before, I don't think that makes any sense at all.
Even though a fund for the whole country might not make sense if it means more borrowing to create it, there may be an opportunity for a narrower application of the same idea.
Now, there might be a case for a targeted program to support clean energy or economic development in a depressed region, some modern version of the Tennessee Valley Authority, something like the clean energy programs we've had, and you could imagine other rationales. But a broad-based sovereign wealth fund, a kind of slush fund for government to do what it wants, achieved by borrowing money, I really don't see the logic at all. During the FDR period, we had something known as the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, which initially was directed at various kinds of infrastructure and housing projects during the New Deal period, and then was repurposed to support various kinds of development of industrial capacity during the Second World War. But that was at a moment when the capacity of the financial system, the nation's capital markets, were far less developed than they are today. And that was at a moment when arguably there was a lot of room for the government to take on debt to finance new investments, whereas today almost everybody feels with the national debt at record levels and huge prospective deficits that we've got a very serious deficit problem, and a high priority should be reducing, not increasing the scale of federal borrowing.
I don't know if it makes sense to borrow money to put into the fund, but I think what the federal government can do is something similar to what Alaska's done, and that is royalties on federal lands, whether it's oil, whether it's gas, possibly timber, mining. Any income that's produced on federal lands could actually have some of that go into a permanent fund and grow a permanent fund just like Alaska has. So especially when you're looking at non-renewable resources, oil and gas, it may make sense. And there is a lot of federal land. There are a lot of offshore leases, onshore leases potentially. And so, it is something to think about. We're proud of the permanent fund because, once again, we know that we have saved a considerable amount of money for future generations.
If the U.S. decides to have one of these funds, it would be really good that they invest in the things that our policies are focused on right now, such as the Inflation Reduction Act, especially as we have these geopolitics with the global value chain that sometimes is harder to rely on some countries, and the global value chains can be a strain. So invest on that, like we have been investing in semiconductors in some parts of the United States, in improving the infrastructure, in investing more in R&D, so partnering with venture capital to come up with pharma, as well as in education. So really align the goals, the mission, the mandate of the Sovereign Wealth Fund with the long-term co-partisan policies. So there are some policies that I think both parties agree and that they are long-term. It's a very long-term, also, it's a long-term focus.
Since Benjamin Franklin admonished Americans that a penny saved is a penny earned before there even was an America, the value of saving and investing has driven our capitalist economy. But the lesson of sovereign wealth funds from Alaska to Norway appears to be we have to make sure that what we're investing for the common good is our savings rather than just moving around the debt on our national balance sheet. Still ahead, the fastest business in the world. We travel to the UK for a report on Formula One. That's next on Wall Street Week.
It's an amazing sport. Crazy because of everything that's involved with it. And expensive because of what it costs.
This is a story about winning. Winning in investing, winning on the track, and what it takes to win at both together. The mid-sized English city of Milton Keynes dates back to the Bronze Age, got its name from a family manor created in the wake of the Norman Conquest, and today has a quarter of its land given over to parks. It might seem a long way away from the hard-charging world of Formula One racing, but it is the home to one of the sport's leading innovators, Oracle Red Bull. Christian Horner is its CEO.
I think the biggest changes have been just in technology. I mean, if I look at the amount of simulations we're running now, and our relationship with Oracle has really exposed that. We're running, literally millions and millions of simulations during the Grand Prix.
Formula One traces its origins back more than 7 decades.
Jumping into an early lead is Juan Fangio, number 1, the former bus driver from the Argentine, and today...
The very first World Championship race held at Silverstone in the UK in 1950. F1 created this montage in 2020 to celebrate its 70th anniversary. Since its founding, it has spread across the globe, but in recent years, it has exploded, with over $3.2 billion in revenues in 2023, up 25% from 2022. And second quarter numbers this year climbing an additional 20% year over year. Those most directly involved in the sport give the credit to a certain Netflix hit documentary series following the sport, and to Liberty Media, which bought F1 in 2019.
It's been huge for us in the US, and I think, ever since the Netflix series, embraced a whole new generation of fans and different countries, and the US was one of those. And without that, Oracle becoming our title partner, Ford becoming our engine partner, ExxonMobil, AT&T, all huge, companies that are getting a great return out of Formula One.
Today, an average of 1.1 million Americans watch each race, double the figure in 2018. The surge in popularity has sent shockwaves through the sport, but one team that's benefited most is McLaren, headed by Zach Brown. There's been a big shift in the United States with respect to Formula One, partly because of the series, Drive to Survive. How much has that driven revenue from your side? Have you seen a big uptake?
Huge. If you look at the brands that we are associated with, the Googles, the Ciscos, the Dells, these Goldman Sachs, these companies weren't in Formula One 5 years ago. I think half of our partners come from the United States now. So I think Netflix did a wonderful thing for Formula One. And when Liberty acquired us, we went from being a very exclusive sport to now we're a very inclusive sport. We weren't very digitally savvy. Now we're very digitally savvy.
All business is competitive, but maybe none so competitive as Formula One. How do you win in Formula One?
Ooh, good question. And there's lots of different wins you need to win in Formula One. It's all about people. Obviously, we're in technology business. It's about never giving up. It's about incremental gains every single day and learning from your mistakes. And you're constantly making mistakes. You need to win with people. So you need to be a great employer and have a great work environment, take care of people and their families. Of course, we need to have state-of-the-art technology. We need to have great commercial partners, because they're the ones that are the big financial contributors to us being able to get the greatest technology and hire the best racing drivers. And with a Formula One team, if you don't have all of that put together, you're not going to win. And in our sport, you lose more than you win, so you better get used to that and get ready to respond for the next race.
If it takes all that to win in Formula One, how do you put together the team to get it done? Gunter Steiner is the former team principal of Haas F1 and author of the book Unfiltered. He put the Haas team together for investor Gene Haas in 2014, so he knows what it takes.
The first thing is you need to find an investor which is happy to invest money in a business which at the time nobody knew where it was going. You need to put together the team with the people to actually go and design a Formula One car, which by no means is easy. You need a race team, you need a commercial team, you need all the administration, and then you can go racing. And that is how we did it.
If all that sounds expensive, it's because it is. F1 limits teams to spending $140 million per year. Driver salaries and the 3 highest earning staff members are exempt, but everything relating to the performance of the car is included, from parts to payroll and even the office Christmas party. It means the sport's leading innovators also have to be efficient.
You have got a cost cap of around 50 to 60 million on capital investment, and then outside of that it could be from 10 million up to 100 million, depends how much you want to pay your drivers, and obviously drivers like Lewis Hamilton, Max Verstappen are paid a lot, these guys. So if you want one of the good drivers, that's a lot of money. So in total, I would say if you use everything up, it could go from around 200 million to about 350 million.
How do you make decisions about where you allocate that money as opposed to not? I mean, you need to compete on that as well.
100%.
You have to be smarter than the other guy in how you spend the money.
Now we have a cost cap, which has been wonderful for the sport. We didn't before. So before, you could spend whatever you had, so you didn't have to make decisions. You just went. Now that we have a cost cap, we can't afford to not have every dollar or pound that we spend translate to performance that goes on the car. So our financial department, led by our CFO, Laura, is very integrated into the racing team. So we're constantly, kind of like any other business, looking at what's the best ROI. Do we want to spend $1 here or $1 here? Well, if this one's going to give us $2 back, this one's going to give us $1.50 back, we're going to spend it here.
Of course, spending money is never the problem. If you're going to have even a hope of making it back, you're going to have to find a good deal of revenue to cover all these costs.
There are two sources of revenue. One, what is called the prize fund in F1, which every team gets from FOM. That is part of the FOM profits, of EBITDA of the FOM. And that depends partly on where you finish the championship, the Constructors' Championship, not the Drivers' Championship.
Now, I think to finish 10th in the championship is about a $80 million payday. To win it is double. And then, it kind of ladders in between. So it's a significant amount of revenue, which obviously goes into funding our racing team. So the difference between first, second, third, fourth, down to 10th is quite significant. Then a lot of our sponsor partner contracts will have performance-related bonuses in it.
E-commerce technology company Rokt is one of those sponsors for the Oracle Red Bull team. In deciding to sponsor the F1 team, CEO Bruce Buchanan said he was looking for a unique way to strengthen his firm's branding.
We've been growing at about 40% every year, and next year we'll have over $800 million in revenue. And we wanted a position in the marketplace where we wanted a partner that was going to serve us well from B2B, so who we could connect with clients at that level, at the C-level suite that we do a lot of the relationships with. How can we create connections? Because our business is about creating opportunities for different businesses to work with each other. That's how we really flourish. And then we also wanted a business that would be good for a recruiting brand, good for potential investors when we get to IPO. So how can we get traction there? We wanted something that was global, so it covered the markets that we were in. And then we wanted something that was a good brand fit. And we went through all of that. There was very few things that ticked all those boxes, but F1 came up as something that was strong in all of our markets, very strong amongst the audience we want to talk to, has a billion people following around the world.
As I look at one of your McLaren F1 cars, there are a lot of names on it, as in any F1 car. How much does it cost to get a name up on that car?
Investments range anywhere from $5 million a year to $75 million. So it ranges quite a bit. It's not an inexpensive sport, but it's a very efficient and drives a tremendous amount of value because we're broadcast into 200 countries. So while the numbers are quite big, the reach is second to none. It's the largest annual single sporting event in the world.
Despite the money that a successful F1 team like Oracle Red Bull receives from the sport and its sponsors, it's still hard to turn a profit on the racing itself, though that's changing thanks to the cost cap and the growing popularity. McLaren reported profits of around $38 million last year, a staggering jump from a loss of around $12 million in 2022. And Brown expects the trend will continue.
We're now commercially the most successful team in the history of Formula One. If you look at the amount of partners we have and the revenue, because we're having a fantastic year, so our numbers will exceed what you've recently read, which was our last year numbers. Your question about the commercial side, the Googles, the Dells, the Ciscos, these are all brand new companies to Formula One. And there was 3 challenges we had before Liberty acquired Formula One. We needed a younger audience, which we now have, a more diverse audience, which we now have, and we weren't as impactful in North America. And so when you talk to these corporations, because 90% of them, North America is hugely important, we've substantially moved the needle on all those areas, and this is what a racing car looks like when you do that.
While sponsorships form the foundation of Formula One revenues, in the end, it's all about winning races. both because of the money it brings in and because it's the reason people are in the business to begin with. So that's where we turn next, from what it takes to build an F1 team to what it takes to win.
When you jump into Formula One, there's nothing that can prepare you to it.
Formula One is all about winning, at the business and on the track. And in the end, you can't win commercially if you're not winning a good share of those races on Sundays, which, as in so much of business and life, comes down to the team.
People talk a lot about the drivers, but there is a lot of people out there that are in the similar stages of their careers. They have given everything, and they are at the pinnacle of the motorsport. Whether you are a mechanic or an engineer or team principal, you are at the pinnacle of the sport, and this is your career, and you want to do the very best possible.
That's Sergio Perez, who drives for Oracle Red Bull Racing alongside three-time world champion Max Verstappen. A 14-year veteran of the sport and six-time race winner, Perez knows better than most that it takes much more than a world-class driver to win in Formula One. For Oracle Red Bull, it all starts back at the factory in Milton Keynes.
Across the whole campus, there's just under 2,000 people.
One of those 2,000 people is Phil Turner, the team's chief future mechanic. As this season winds down, he's already looking ahead to build next season's car.
Some years we've had a complete clean sheet of paper, and the car's been designed, from scratch, year on year. But with the cost cap now, we tend to try and carry over the good bits of the previous year's cars. So from maybe some of the good parts from this year's car will go into next year's car, but again, some of it depends on packaging. Maybe the good parts we want to keep won't fit in next year's package of car, and so we have to, tweak it and make it fit the new package.
So all these dynos are basically recreating track conditions. So we're running the engines in a steady state condition, where we're tuning them, developing them, evolving them, running race distances, Grand Prix starts, pit stops even. So yeah, we're basically proving out the engines in a controlled environment.
It typically takes around 12 months to build an F1 car. But given that Oracle Red Bull won a staggering 21 of 22 races last year, it was more about refining the car than building a new one. For Turner, that means taking input from the 22 different departments at Oracle Red Bull to come up with what the team feels is the best car to take to the track.
There's loads of different departments that go into putting the car on track and I suppose making it go around the track as well, trackside. Electronics, composites, mechanics, technicians, hydraulics, gearbox technicians. There's the different concepts that come through, and obviously design, the DO talk to each other quite a lot and quite frequently as they're producing a new car and designing it. Aero might come up with a package and say, we want everything to fit within this shape, and then mechanical will get involved and say, it's not going to happen. They'll try, but maybe sometimes it doesn't happen. There's compromise on both sides. So this is all about front aero. We can change the flap angle on this, reduce it, increase it, depending on how much front downforce they want on the car. Depending on the circuit as well, we can have different types of flaps with different cambers. They may design something, and then we go over to the DO and have a look and say, well, we can't work on that. And then it's, maybe you go back to drawing board slightly, different tooling, or they may have to change things slightly to help us work on it.
Once the car's built, it's prepped for racing. Drivers test the car before the season starts, and the team runs simulations to see how it performs in different weather conditions, different tracks, and in different race settings.
This here is a race plot, which is really one of the main tools that we use in strategy to kind of see what's happening during the race.
And that's where Hannah Schmitz comes in. She's Oracle Red Bull's principal strategy engineer.
As principal strategy engineer, it means when I'm at the track, I'll be sitting on the pit wall making the decisions about when we pit the car, what tyres we fit, basically trying to come up with a way that we can win the race. And then when I'm here in the operations room, then it's more trying to gather all the data together to give to that person on the pit wall and make sure they can make the right decisions in the race.
The team runs some 8 billion simulations before a race, helping them settle on a strategy tailored to each competition, working out optimal times to take pit stops, which tires to use, and when to attack and when to defend.
Before we've even got to the track, we will have run billions of simulations looking at various things. We will already have an idea of what we think the race strategy will be, because obviously we've got to make decisions right from the first practice session. So you've got all the actual data points, so that's things like what we're expecting the pace of our competitors to be, the speeds, the tyre degradations. Has something changed at this track compared to last year?
But of course, F1 is unpredictable, and sometimes even the 8 billion simulations can't prepare you for what happens on the track. And so the team is always adapting. Schmitz is stationed on the pit wall, while a team of around 50 analysts are poring over live data back at the team's NASA-like control room at Milton Keynes. Some monitor the weather, some monitor lap times. Some are even tasked with trying to decode rival teams' strategies.
Live in a race, we're now running simulations all the time, so every time we update a bit of data, we can see how that would impact what strategy we're going to do. And so we use the Oracle Cloud infrastructure to do that, and that means we're still running billions of simulations during the race itself, which is extremely helpful for us. And then when you're here in the operations room, it basically feels like you are at the track. That's why we don't have any windows, so that you don't know what time of day it is. And it's instant. Like talking on the intercom's instant. These are wind indicators, so they're kind of showing the speed of the wind and the direction, and we'll have that at different points around the track, which we get from the weather stations at the track.
Schmitz takes all that data on board and uses it to make real-time adjustments to the driver's race strategy. It's a role that requires a sharp, decisive mind and a steely nerve.
It's important to try and take a breath, tell people to stand by if you need them to, make sure you're getting the most important information. So for me, when I'm on the pit wall, that will be the information coming from here, from the operations room, because they'll be the ones looking at the specific data. They'll also have done, some of them have done the strategy role on the pit wall, so they know exactly what you need to know that might impact your decisions. There is also the race engineers and Christian and Pierre, and we'll all have a kind of conversation about what the plans are. You know, I'm planning to open the safety car window on this lap, and I think the next tyre should still be this one. Do the race engineers agree? Do they have any data that might mean something different? What's the driver saying on the radio? Does that impact the strategy I'm going to do? And then we're also listening to all the radios of all our competitors, because at the end of the day, we could do the best strategy in the world, but we're actually racing other people. So what they do has an impact on what we should do.
Of course, when Schmitz does make the call for a driver to pit, it's then over to the mechanics to ensure no time is lost.
Everything looks synchronized. You can tell a fast stop because even the sound of the guns, everything is in synchronized, and the car just, the whole thing is just like in one beat. Whereas if it doesn't quite go so well, even a 2.5 second stop, you could hear it without even looking at the stopwatch.
Oracle Red Bull has won F1's fastest pit stop award each of the past 6 seasons, an art refined by practicing twice a day. 3 mechanics are stationed on each wheel. One is the gunman, responsible for loosening the old tire and tightening the new one. One removes the old tire, and another places the new tire on the car. One mechanic jacks up the car, and 2 more are on the side holding it steady. When it comes off, teams can have a car in and out just like that. For the pit crew, it's a matter of split seconds. For the driver, it's a game of inches.
It's very important when you come in to stop right on your marks, because for the boys, it's less of a movement. If you stop right on your marks, that if you go over or under, they have to move a little bit more. They're amazing. The amount of practice they're doing for a pit stop, because if you think about it, half a second can make the difference on winning a race, and that half a second can come from the pit stop. So they're very important. This is why it's a team sport.
As we head into the final races of the season, Max Verstappen is set to seal a 4th Drivers' Championship for Oracle Red Bull. But the race for the Constructors' title is closer than ever, in part because Perez, as the number 2 driver, has fallen behind.
You need both drivers delivering and performing. I mean, it's the constructors' points that are where the distribution of the prize fund is based upon of where you are in the constructors' table. You don't get a single dollar for winning the Drivers' World Championship.
But the drama of the 2024 F1 season is also a product of improvements made at Oracle Red Bull's rivals, Ferrari and McLaren. Improvements made throughout the season at a breakneck speed.
Pace of development in Formula One is awesome. So if you took the car that qualified first at the beginning of the year and you left it untouched, it would be last by the end of the year. So that's the pace of development of our entire sport. About 2% covers the best to the worst. So to make small incremental gains can have big material impact. Imagine in an airport, everybody's walking, but then there's a few people that are on the moving walkway. And so we just outdeveloped them over the course of the year to get in front of them, as has Ferrari, and it's been remarkable. Development on the car is primarily aerodynamic, so you'll see things like our side pods change over the course of the year. So we're trying to put as much downforce on the car as possible and reduce drag. That's ultimately where the performance comes in. But you do get into things, suspension changes, so you change 80% of what's allowed to be changed. But you'll see all of our wings, and it's very small changes that can make a big difference. And then a lot of the downforce is also created under the floor.
The 2024 Formula One season has turned out to be one of the closest and most dramatic in recent memory, particularly where it matters most for a team's revenues, the Constructors' Trophy. It's about winning on the track in the last few races, winning in the design and engineering, winning in the pits, and whoever wins there will stand to win a great deal financially as the value of teams continues to surge.
Formula One is the biggest team sport in the world, and people, what they don't see is, you just see our shop window at a Grand Prix weekend. It's what's going on behind the scenes throughout the organization. The amount of people that are involved is phenomenal, and it takes every one of those personnel to design, develop, and operate cars that we are achieving these incredible results with. I'm a racer at heart. I enjoy it most of all when the red light goes out and the race is underway and it's just you and your team and your drivers. I think you have to keep a calm head and try and read a situation. You're not always going to get it right, but you certainly try and get more right than you get wrong and learn from the ones that you do get wrong. That's life, that's Formula One.
Next on Wall Street Week, what the next Trump administration could mean for the U.S. economy. The state of the U.S. economy was effectively on the ballot in the U.S. elections this year. We asked former Treasury Secretary and Wall Street Week contributor Larry Summers what economists can learn from the outcome.
So, first lesson is a reminder of the toxicity of inflation. 3 Democratic presidents have seen their terms end early with a lurch to the right. Lyndon Johnson, Jimmy Carter, and now the Biden-Harris administration. And in all 3 cases, an important part of what propelled citizen dissatisfaction was inflation brought on by some combination of, yes, supply shocks, but also excessively expansionary policies. There's also a cautionary tale for President Trump. Inflation's toxicity works against both parties if they're therefore, much less if they create inflation. And the Trump program as outlined by the campaign, dump on the independence of the Fed, call for a weaker dollar, have massive tax cuts that expand the government deficit, impose supply shocks by tariffs that raise the price of imported goods and everything that competes with them, risk labor shortage by deporting millions of people from our country. Cumulatively, this is a more inflationary policy by far than what President Biden talked about and did in 2021. So if implemented, it will violate the Hippocratic Oath of first do no harm and will be damaging to our national economy and I suspect very damaging to a president who authors and supports such policies. So I hope, for the sake of our national economy, that a Trump administration will start being quiet about the Fed and the dollar, will recognize the need to contain federal deficits, and will use the threat of tariffs and the threat of deportations as leverage to achieve important objectives like opening foreign markets, but not think of those as desirable steps once you have to take them, because I think that could be very, very costly for confidence. Inflation is corrosive with respect to trust in institutions, and that is a huge problem in today's America.
Larry, you laid out several aspects of what President-elect Trump has talked about that could be stimulative and inflationary. What about one that would go the other way? What about some of the really dramatic cuts in spending that President-elect Trump says he's going to effectuate, in part with Elon Musk? Wouldn't that help on the inflation front?
It might, if it could really happen. But here's the problem. We have to increase national defense spending. We're not going to default on the debt, and interest is soaring. President Trump has promised hands-off Social Security. He's in fact added to our Social Security problem by stopping the taxing of Social Security benefits. He has said no cuts to Medicare. That's almost all the federal budget. Federal payroll is less than the $2 trillion that Elon Musk talks about. If we fired every single federal worker, we wouldn't get the savings that Elon Musk talks about. So there's a profound non-realism there. Of course, we should find efficiencies everywhere that we can. And of course, there are places where there is waste. But the idea that there are large savings there, that when it was called waste, fraud, and abuse by Ronald Reagan, it was wrong. When it was called the magic asterisk by George Bush, it was wrong. When it was called reinventing government by Al Gore, it was wrong. It's not wrong to make these attempts, and there are real gains to be had. But the idea that they are large relative to the tax cuts, relative to the $10 trillion that President Trump's tax proposals add up to against today's baseline, it's just not possible if you look at simple arithmetic.
Are there real cuts there and actually pulling back substantially on the Inflation Reduction Act and the stimulus of those income tax credits for green energy?
There, if you do, I don't think that's likely to happen. And I think it's problematic for lots of reasons, including the fact that people should be able to rely on government commitments in the United States. And there are all sorts of people who have made plans in reliance on those commitments, not to mention the importance of supporting some conversion of our economy to green things. But any gains there for the deficit are going to be very small. Look, on the cut spending side, I really do think what President Trump is saying just doesn't come close to there being any real arithmetic. But I think there's a different area that he has also emphasized where I think he has a far, far, far stronger argument. And that's the whole regulatory area and the broad set of processes that make it so hard to do big things in today's America. Those are the reasons why Elon Musk is able to put far more into orbit than NASA. Those are the reasons why building a mile of highways costs, after correcting, even after adjusting for inflation, 3 times what it did in the 1960s. Those are the reasons why, in order to repair a 300-foot bridge near my office in Boston, it was necessary to keep traffic scaled away from one lane for 62 months. Those are huge issues. And whether it is making it possible to build new universities, or whether it is possible to transmit renewable electricity from one part of the country to another, or whether it's possible to procure effectively so that we're not being badly outproduced by the Russians in terms of artillery shells. There's a huge agenda of unblocking things and being able to move quickly and boldly in the United States the way we once did. That's an important theme. It should command bipartisan support. Look, it's crucial to something the American people are very focused on, which is lower priced housing. You need permits for people to be able to build starter homes and get them done quickly and efficiently. And that's a big, broad area of reform. You know, the first real involvement in public life that President Trump had was many years ago when the Trump Organization committed to fix the Central Park skating rink after New York municipal government somehow couldn't get that done. And he got that done, and that was whatever you say about the guy, that was a very positive and constructive achievement. And we just need a lot of that on a much larger scale if we're going to reap the full potential of our economy and if we're going to compete as effectively with China as possible.
That does it for us here on Wall Street Week. I'm David Weston. We'll see you again next week for more stories of capitalism.